Angkor, the heart of the Khmer Empire, once ruled an empire that stretched across Southeast Asia. Its stone temples rose like mountains, its canals and reservoirs tamed rivers, and its kings wore gold and silk, speaking with the authority of gods. Yet, all empires have shadows, and Angkor's shadow came from the west. Siam, a kingdom hungry for power and prestige, saw the riches of Angkor not just as tribute, but as a prize waiting to be taken. The invasions were swift, merciless, and transformative. Elephant-mounted soldiers thundered across rice paddies. Fire and sword reshaped the city's sanctuaries. Khmer generals fought desperately, but the empire was weakened by drought, rebellion, and decay. Temples that had once echoed with chants and incense became silent tombs. Citizens fled in waves, carrying sacred relics and memories of a golden age. This is not merely a story of armies and kings, but of ordinary people, farmers, priests, children, caught between the glory of Angkor's past and the devastation of its fall. Tonight, we descend into that darkness. We walk through flooded streets and scorched stone, through betrayal and courage. This is the true story of how Siamese ambition reshaped the Khmer Empire, and how the echoes of fire and conquest still linger on the walls of Angkor. The sun had not yet risen, but Angkor already smelled of smoke and fear. From the temple towers to the flooded rice fields beyond the city walls, a silence hung heavy, broken only by the distant thunder of drums and the low murmur of water flowing through the ancient canals. Angkor was immense, a city of stone and water, a labyrinth of gods and kings. Its streets, lined with markets, courtyards, and sacred reservoirs, had once pulsed with life. Now shadows moved among the carvings of apsaras and deities, and every figure seemed to watch, knowing the city's glory was at its mercy. In the west, Siamese armies prepared. Mounted on elephants and armored in bronze and cloth, soldiers sharpened spears and loaded fire arrows. The generals spoke in measured tones, but their eyes burned with anticipation. Angkor, they believed, had become complacent, a jewel unguarded by vigilance, weakened by years of internal struggle, droughts, and peasant uprisings. To the Siamese, this was not just a conquest of territory, but a reclamation of power, a rewriting of history. Meanwhile, within the walls of Angkor, panic stirred among the citizens. Farmers abandoned their paddies, carrying rice and livestock, hoping to escape the coming storm. Priests tried to rally the faithful, chanting beneath towers carved with gods, their voices trembling as much with fear as with devotion. Soldiers scrambled along causeways and across temple terraces, sharpening blades and checking armor. The air was thick with tension, with the kind of dread that seeps into bones and refuses to leave. The kings of Angkor were not blind to the threat. From the high balcony of the royal palace, the monarch surveyed his city. His robes of gold and silk seemed fragile against the weight of the Siamese threat. Messages had come from generals in the outer provinces, villages pillaged, supply lines cut, allies lost. The king knew the coming invasion would not merely take wealth, it would take the soul of the empire. His counselors whispered of diplomacy, of bribes and treaties, but the king's heart understood the truth. Angkor would be tested in blood and fire. At dawn, the first scouts arrived. Their silhouettes emerged from the jungle like ghosts, elephants wading through the marshes, their massive feet sinking into mud and water. They carried flags of Siam painted in vibrant reds and golds. Drums rolled across the fields, echoing against the temple towers, a sound designed to intimidate and unnerve. The citizens of Angkor pressed their faces against the riverbanks and canals, watching in awe and horror. This was not a neighboring dispute, it was a force that could erase generations in a single morning. Inside the temples, monks hurried to protect sacred relics. Incense burned thick, mingling with the smell of mud and wet stone. Bells tolled in the courtyards, signaling the call to arms. Young boys, barely older than 12, were armed with spears and shields, trained to fight alongside seasoned warriors. Mothers clutched their children, whispering prayers that their offspring might survive the coming storm. Every sound carried weight: the snapping of twigs, the murmur of water, the faint crackle of distant fire. Angkor seemed to hold its breath, poised on the edge between grandeur and annihilation. The Siamese generals advanced in formation, elephants leading, soldiers flanking, archers preparing to release volleys of arrows. As the first shafts flew across the horizon, they tore through the morning mist, striking the outskirts of Angkor. Smoke began to curl from thatched homes and smaller shrines. Fire spread quickly, consuming dry wood and thatched roofs, sending villagers fleeing into the canals or into the jungle beyond. The city, which had survived centuries of internal strife, floods and rebellions, now faced a foe whose patience and ferocity were absolute. The battle unfolded slowly, deliberately, as if history itself were unrolling in real time. Each temple terrace became a defensive stronghold. Soldiers clashed in narrow alleys, their cries echoing across water and stone. The clash of bronze armor and iron swords rang louder than the drums of war. Even the elephants, massive and terrifying, were wounded and fell into the mud, their trumpets of pain and rage mixing with the cries of human combatants. Angkor, once a city of order and ceremony, became a chaotic stage of fire, water, and steel. Throughout the city, ordinary people became the unwilling chroniclers of history. An old man crouched among the reeds near the moat, sketching in the dirt the path of fleeing Siamese soldiers. A mother carried her infant across broken causeways, praying that the gods carved in stone would shield them. Farmers seized bamboo poles to defend their homes, knowing little of strategy, but understanding survival. Each person, each act, became a thread in the tapestry of Angkor's final stand, their courage and despair inseparable from the story of the city itself. By nightfall, the first wave of the Siamese assault had retreated, leaving behind smoke, shattered homes, and dozens of casualties. But the city was not yet conquered. Fires continued to burn in the outer districts, and the smell of blood mingled with incense and river mud. Within the palace, the king contemplated his options. Retreat was unthinkable. Diplomacy had failed. And yet, the future of the empire seemed precariously balanced on the edge of a sword. Even amid chaos, Angkor's stone monuments endured. Towers and terraces, temples and galleries all bore silent witness to the unfolding calamity. Apsaras carved in delicate poses, kings immortalized in bas-relief, elephants frozen in battle scenes, all now surrounded by real carnage. The city's memory, embedded in stone, contrasted sharply with the fragility of its flesh and blood inhabitants. The first night of invasion passed, leaving Angkor trembling but alive. The citizens, monks and soldiers huddled together, exhausted but resolute. Somewhere above the treetops, the moon glimmered on temple spires, casting long shadows across the canals. Angkor had survived the first storm of fire and fury, but everyone knew the worst was yet to come. In those quiet, tense hours, a realization settled over the city. The Siamese invasions were not merely a test of arms, but a reckoning of history itself. Generations of ambition, pride, and hubris now collided with the relentless ambitions of a neighbor who saw weakness as opportunity. Angkor's heart had not yet stopped beating, but its pulse was faltering. The shadow over the great city had only begun. The second wave came with the sun hidden behind thick clouds, casting the city in a muted grey that seemed to foretell its doom. Angkor, for all its grandeur, could not escape the inevitability of time and ambition. The Siamese armies moved with terrifying precision, elephants trampling fields, soldiers cutting through villages, fire arrows streaking through the sky. The sound of destruction echoed off sandstone towers, sending vibrations through temples that had stood for centuries. In their stone veins, Angkor's past seemed to shudder, as if the city itself understood that the empire it had carried for generations was being ripped apart. Inside the palace, the king paced. His robes were soaked with sweat, his hands trembling over maps and reports. Counselors whispered about negotiation, about tribute, about surrender. But the king shook his head. This city, these walls, and the riverine veins that fed it were the embodiment of Khmer greatness. To give it away would be to erase generations of glory in a single act. Yet as the fires spread and the cries of the wounded rose from the outer districts, he felt the cold certainty that Angkor's era was ending. In the outer city, chaos reigned. Farmers armed with bamboo poles and iron-tipped spears fought desperately against seasoned Siamese soldiers. Children ran through flooded streets, wading waist-deep in water to escape marauding troops. Elderly monks moved among the wounded, chanting prayers and sprinkling holy water, their robes sodden with rain and blood. The air was thick with smoke, the smell of wet earth, burning wood, and human sweat mingling into a suffocating haze. Every step across the city was measured, cautious, a negotiation between survival and inevitability. The Siamese armies pushed relentlessly, taking district after district. Elephants knocked down gates and walls, their massive feet crushing stone and flesh alike. Fire devoured the wooden galleries of temples, leaving blackened skeletons of their former glory. The citizens fled into the forests and wetlands, some joining guerrilla groups, others abandoning their homes entirely. Traders, who had once moved freely between provinces, found themselves trapped, carrying only what they could in baskets or bundles. Angkor's riches, rice, gold, carved stone, and sacred relics, were stripped away, looted, or destroyed, leaving behind a hollow shell of a city that had once ruled the imagination of Southeast Asia. Amid the destruction, small acts of defiance emerged. A young soldier climbed a temple wall to fire arrows at the advancing Siamese. A mother hid her children under bamboo mats in the flooded terraces. Priests rang bells and beat drums to signal resistance, attempting to rally those who remained. Every act, however minor, was a declaration that the Khmer spirit would not vanish quietly. Even as fire consumed districts and temples alike, the people of Angkor refused to surrender entirely, holding on to hope and memory. By the third day, the pattern was undeniable. The city was fractured, its walls burned, and its defenders exhausted. The king realized the inevitable. Angkor's heart had been pierced. He ordered the evacuation of the royal family and sacred relics to the surrounding provinces, praying that the essence of the empire could survive even if the city itself fell. Citizens carried golden statues, manuscripts, and sacred objects through muddy paths and hidden waterways, fleeing the destructive sweep of Siamese ambition. In the temples, the carvings of gods stared silently down at the carnage. The delicate bas-reliefs of apsaras, kings and warriors, were chipped by artillery, scarred by fire, yet they endured. Soldiers and monks alike paused to observe them, realizing that stone could outlast human violence. Some whispered that the gods themselves were witnesses, judging the acts of men and the consequences of pride. Even amid devastation, there was a strange reverence in the destruction, a reminder that history, though scarred, does not vanish. The Siamese generals, confident in their conquest, did not press further into the city's heart. Their strategy had been swift and brutal: fracture the empire, break the city's will, take its treasures, and leave Angkor a shadow of its former self. In doing so, they ensured that the story of Khmer power would not be entirely erased, but forever marked by defeat. Soldiers looted, then withdrew to the west, leaving flames and silence behind. Where life had once thrived, smoke and ash now lingered. The heart of the Khmer Empire, though not entirely destroyed, had been irrevocably broken. In the aftermath, the survivors faced the long, slow work of rebuilding. Villages around the city attempted to restore irrigation canals, repair homes, and tend to wounded relatives. The jungle crept back, swallowing streets and walls, hiding the scars of war beneath moss and creeping vines. Monks returned to the surviving temples, lighting incense and chanting to preserve memory, to offer prayers for the dead, and to remind the living that Angkor's spirit endured beyond physical destruction. Historians centuries later would look back at the Siamese invasions as a turning point. Angkor, once the jewel of Southeast Asia, ceased to be a capital. Power shifted eastward, rivers and trade routes changed, and the Khmer people scattered, carrying their history with them. Yet despite the conquest, Angkor's culture, art, and religion survived, spreading across the region and influencing civilizations far beyond the borders of Cambodia. Even today, as visitors climb the terraces of Angkor Wat, walk through corridors scarred by time, or gaze at the towers of Bayong, there is a palpable sense of what was lost and what endured. Every stone, every carving, every flooded terrace whispers stories of pride, ambition, and resilience. The fires of invasion may have consumed timber and flesh, but they could not consume the identity of a people. The fall of Angkor was not a single event, but a cascade of decisions, misfortunes, and relentless assaults. It was the clash of empires, the collision of human ambition and divine symbolism. It was ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, their lives torn apart, yet their spirit refusing to vanish. History remembers the kings and generals, but it is also written in the footsteps of the fleeing villagers, the prayers of monks, and the carved faces of gods who watched in silence. As dusk settles over the jungle, Angkor remains, silent, scarred, yet majestic. The towers and galleries bear witness to triumph and tragedy alike. Rivers and canals shimmer under the moonlight, reflecting both destruction and endurance. The past, though battered, speaks to the present. Angkor's stones, once the target of conquest, are now symbols of resilience. The Siamese invasions reshaped the empire, but they could not erase its soul. In the quiet, one can almost hear the echoes of the fallen city. Drums of war, cries of the desperate, and the whispered prayers of monks. History, relentless and unforgiving, leaves its mark. And yet, from the ashes, memory endures. The story of Angkor's fall reminds us that even in devastation, there is a pulse that survives, a spirit that cannot be extinguished. Until next time, stay safe and see you in the next history.